Last month, I made a video taking a look at some of the most inconsistent players in all of world football. There was no lack of candidates for that 7, and that is unsurprising given the fact that consistency is perhaps the single most difficult attribute to attain and the most desirable among managers out of every attribute in the sport. You can have all of the talent in the world, but if you only exhibit it once every 5 games, you are unlikely to ever make it at the very highest level. So in today's video, I'm turning last month's on its head and asking who are the most consistent players in all of world football, which some of you may recall is a question that I put to those of you following me on Twitter back in December. As I said then, and will repeat now to preempt the inevitable jokes, I am primarily interested in players who are consistently good rather than consistently bad, which is bad news for Harry Winks. I'm sorry, Harry, that was completely uncalled for, and I would like to offer you my unreserved apologies if you're watching this video, even if, you have had your fair share of stinkers this season. I wanted to include players who are consistent in all aspects of their game, and have been consistent not only so far this season, but ideally for the past 3 or 4 years. Crucially, I will not be including either Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi, who have been remarkably consistent for the last 15 years and are 2 of the most consistent players of my lifetime at least, if not the entire history of the sport. The main reason for that being that it would just be a bit boring, and who wants to hear me bang on about Messi and Ronaldo being good at football all the time as though that were news? Right, without further ado then, who was extremely inconsistent, and without both Messi and Ronaldo, here is who I would pick out as the 7 most consistent players in world football, along with a number of honourable mentions. 7th, Joshua Kimmich. In the week that I first planned this video, Joshua Kimmich came under a little bit of fire in Bavaria, particularly in light of Bayern Munich's 4-2 defeat to VfL Bochum, but you can take from his inclusion in this 7 that I don't think most of that criticism is justified. Former Arsenal, Schalke, and Borussia Dortmund goalkeeper Jens Lehmann came out and said that he wasn't sure that Kimmich was, quote, a real number 6, following that defeat, which would seem to be an unusual comment to make about someone who has been the best number 6 in world football for the past 3 or 4 years. Kimmich came through the youth ranks at Stuttgart before making his professional debut for RB Leipzig. Clearly always a talent, there was a danger with Kimmich that his versatility could see him become a bit of a utility man following his move to Bayern Munich in 2015. A jack of all trades, but a master of none. He made his debut for Pep Guardiola in Bavaria, covering at centre-back, but he soon found a happy home at right-back, a position that he really made his own for both club and country, as Philippe Lahm first moved into midfield and then retired. Kimmich was long labelled as being Lahm's successor, and like Lahm, he is remarkably consistent. Also like Lahm, Kimmich moved into holding midfield much earlier than his compatriot and former teammate. And perhaps that was inevitable, with Pep Guardiola, Xabi Alonso, and Philippe Lahm himself forming his most pivotal early influences. The genius of Kimmich's game, in many respects, lies in its simplicity, though he is capable of cropping up with rare moments of sheer magic which can turn a game on its head. Personally, I think he was the most consistent right-back in the world for maybe even 2 years, and he has quite possibly been the most consistent holding midfielder over the last 3.5 years as well. Given the fact that he is still only 27, that isn't bad going, so he gets us started in this 7. 6th, Jordan Henderson. I recently took a fair amount of flack for including Jordan Henderson in my series taking a look at the greatest players of the Premier League era in each position. Cheeky plug there. But the fact that Henderson is extremely good at football is a hill that I'm absolutely willing to die on. Henderson has always been very harshly scrutinised. From his early days at Liverpool, where he was initially branded as having been a waste of money and almost forced out of the club by Brendan Rodgers, to inheriting the Liverpool armband from arguably the club's most beloved and arguably the club's greatest player of all time in the form of Steven Gerrard. What's more, at each turn, it is not as though Henderson has immediately been able to silence all of his critics. It took time for him to re-establish himself at Liverpool after rejecting a move to Fulham. It took even longer for him to become a nailed-on starter and there were some who doubted his credentials as club captain all the way up until the moment in which he lifted the Champions League trophy, just as his predecessor had back in 2005. Slowly but surely though, Henderson has established himself not only as one of the most consistent, but also one of the most effective, important, and I would argue, simply best midfielders within the European game. Tireless, intelligent, and a fantastic organiser and leader who almost always improves Liverpool's starting 11 in my eyes since at least the beginning of the 2017-18 season, which is 4.5 years ago now. Henderson has been phenomenal. He has never made a FIFA Pro World 11 or even a second string as far as I'm aware, and I doubt that he ever will. Henderson is the ultimate unfashionable midfielder, but he hardly ever puts a foot majorly wrong, and I can think of few, if any, more consistent players in the Premier League over the past 5 years. Fifth, Karim Benzema. It should come as no surprise that two midfielders have already featured in this 7, and that there will be more to come. When we think of consistent footballers, we probably tend to think of holding midfielders, defenders, and maybe one or two really excellent goalkeepers. For forwards, such levels of uber consistency are difficult to come by. Entire games can pass one by in which you only have a handful of touches, and if you miss a big chance or fail to score a goal, your performance will often be written off as being a disappointment, regardless of any other contributions you may have made. It is testament to the longevity and consistency of Karim Benzema, therefore, and particularly his form over the last 2 or 3 years, that I don't think that this will even be a controversial inclusion, in the same way that I don't doubt that it very much would have been in, say, 2017 or 2018. Benzema has now been at Real Madrid for close to 13 years, where he will soon become the club's second highest scorer of all time, in addition to ranking 4th in the Champions League's all-time scoring charts. That alone, even if he were a pure poacher, ought to cement Benzema's status as a legend of the game. But there was a feeling for many years that Benzema was somehow fortunate to be sharing a forward line with Cristiano Ronaldo, and that his trophy cabinet and reputation had both been inflated by Ronaldo's brilliance. Of course, Ronaldo did play a pivotal role in Benzema and Real Madrid winning quite so many trophies. But in reality, Ronaldo was just as fortunate to share a forward line with the Frenchman as the Frenchman was to share a forward line with him. Benzema was, and indeed still is, a man capable of scoring 30 goals every season for any team in the world. But he was happy to put his own statistical output on the back burner as Ronaldo swept up accolade after accolade. Since Ronaldo left Madrid in 2018, Benzema has been incredibly prolific and incredibly consistent. Even when he doesn't score a goal, which is rare these days, his all-round forward play is outstanding, and there have been few more consistent forwards during my lifetime. Fourth, Sergio Busquets. The most difficult inclusion in this 7, both in terms of whether and where he should feature, and also the inclusion that I suspect will cause the most backlash in the comments. I'll start by talking about why I expect that to be the case, and therefore will perhaps render those comments somewhat redundant. Barcelona are a mess, and even established long-term stalwarts like Jordi Alba, Gerard Piqué, and Sergio Busquets have felt the burn. Busquets is no longer the player that he once was, and what he once was the best pivot in world football, or at least he is no longer capable of exerting the same stunning, suffocating impact upon almost every game that he plays in as he once did. That is likely because he is no longer playing in arguably the finest midfield trio of all time, and Barcelona, much as they may deny it, have changed the way in which they play the game. Nonetheless, in isolation, I don't actually think that Busquets has changed all that much. His touch, anticipation, vision and awareness are all still among the best in the business, and had Spain progressed further at the summer's Euros, I think he would have been in contention for the Player of the Tournament award. At what he does, Busquets is arguably still the best player in the world, and in that sense, he almost never has a bad game. Indeed, by that metric, there have been few occasions in his entire career in which I have seen Busquets have a genuinely poor game. He is simply unflappable, a technical marvel, and a master at efficiently recycling the ball. In the simplest possible terms, I still think The Busquets is one of the most consistent players on the planet, so he had to feature. Third, N'Golo Kante. N'Golo Kante was one of the first names that I added to my shortlist when planning this 7, and the only reason that he wasn't an automatic inclusion is because of his injury problems. Over the past 2.5 years, Kante has suffered from repeated, mostly short-term groin, muscle, hamstring, and knee injuries. Of course, that has limited the number of games in which Kante has been able to play, but it hasn't really had a major impact on his performance levels when he has played. Indeed, he came back from a minor muscle injury last season to win the Man of the Match award in both legs of Chelsea's semi-final success against Real Madrid, and he repeated the feat in the final against Manchester City. So if consistency means playing every game to you, then Kante shouldn't feature. If you think that consistency means putting in top-class performances on a routine basis when you do actually play, and very rarely dropping below an 8 out of 10, Kante absolutely does deserve to feature. The Frenchman has been relentlessly brilliant, when fit, ever since he arrived in English football with Leicester City in 2015. And on his day, you can probably count on one hand the number of players in all of world football who are able to exert such a staggering level of influence upon the outcome of a game of football. All things considered, I decided to let Kante off for his injuries because, I'm just nice like that. And also because they have tended to interrupt and temporarily disrupt his impact by ruling him out for short periods of time, rather than causing a more substantial drop in form or period on the sidelines. If he never got injured at all, however, it is quite possible that he could have taken top spot. Second, Luka Modric. Most of you will recall that having been outstanding playing as a number 10 at Tottenham Hotspur, Luka Modric endured a pretty tough start to life at Real Madrid. During his debut campaign, he found it difficult to dislodge Mesut Ozil in the number 10 position. Meanwhile, Sami Khedira and Xabi Alonso had a fairly formidable stronghold on the two deeper midfield roles behind him. Modric still made 53 appearances that season, many of them off the bench, and some seeing him forced out wide, but he was largely ineffective, and Spanish magazine Marca even named him as La Liga's worst signing of the season. Almost a decade on, you would have to say, with the benefit of hindsight, that Modric probably wasn't the worst La Liga signing of the 2012-13 season. In fact, I would be willing to go out on a limb on this one and describe him as having been one of the better La Liga signings of the 2012-13 campaign. Modric established himself during his second season at the Santiago Bernabeu, and after Ozil, Khedira and Alonso all departed, he formed a fantastic midfield partnership alongside Toni Kroos. Playing in a much deeper role to the one that he occupied in the Premier League, Modric quickly became one of world football's outstanding midfield all-rounders. A tireless runner, flawless in possession, and tactically extremely intelligent both on and off the ball. All of those attributes have remained a constant and have been exhibited rather emphatically almost every time that Modric takes to the pitch for the last 8 or 9 years. Even now, aged 36, Modric is comfortably among the best and most consistent midfielders in the entire world. A freak in many respects, Modric is the only man to break the Messi and Ronaldo duopoly over the Ballon d'Or during the last 15 years. Well, him and coronavirus, I suppose. And whilst I don't think he deserved to win that award in 2018, there can be absolutely no doubt about his class or consistency. And I think a case could be made for him being the most consistent footballer on the planet. First, Robert Lewandowski. I said whilst talking about Karim Benzema that it tends to be defenders and defensive midfielders who earn titles like Mr. Consistent, but arguably the most consistent player of his generation, outside of Messi and Ronaldo, and the most consistent of the last few years, even including those two, you could argue, has been Robert Lewandowski. To say that Lewandowski is prolific in front of goal would be like saying that Nadine Dorries is about as intelligent as a rotten cucumber. That is to say, it would be a gross understatement. Over the last 3 seasons, including the current campaign, Lewandowski has scored 142 goals in 120 games for Bayern Munich, which is what is officially known in football as being a silly goal-scoring record. Games in which Lewandowski fails to score at least 1 goal are now viewed as having been an aberration, and in total, the Polish great has made 45 goal contributions in 36 games so far this term. At the age of 33, history tells us that Lewandowski should be starting to wane at this moment in time, but there is scant evidence of that being the case. If anything, the last 10 to 15 games that Lewandowski has played have been as good and as consistent as anything that we have ever seen from him previously. The fact that it is just assumed that Lewandowski will always turn up and deliver, both in terms of a performance and in terms of goals, puts him almost on par with Messi and Ronaldo as being too tedious to include. But since I didn't exclude him during the introduction, I felt as though he had to take top spot. So those are my top 7, but this was a really tricky video to whittle down to a final 7, so there are a number of honourable mentions who very nearly featured. Out of all of them, I think Thomas Muller and Cesar Azpilicueta perhaps came the closest to actually making my 7. But equally honourable mentions are owed to the likes of Bernardo Silva, Jan Oblak, Declan Rice, John McGinn, Mohamed Salah, Stuart Dallas, Ben Mee, Lewis Dunk, Tony Kroos, Heung-min Son, Thiago Silva, Inaki Williams, and Julian Weigl, among many, many others. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed, of course, and have notifications turned on for the most inconsistent YouTube channel in the entire world, which is, of course, HITC Sevens. You can also find me on social media, on Twitter or Instagram, mainly Twitter, if we're being honest, via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.